Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Now, Afghan Taliban demand a timetable for the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghan soil in order to start a intra-Afghan peace process. Now, this talk was held between Afghan Taliban and the US Special Envoy in Doha over the weekend. It also comes just a week after the Taliban attended talks in Moscow for the first time at an international conference to discuss the Afghan peace efforts. Now, joining us today is Rahimullah Yousafzai, senior journalist, and Sikandar Shah, professor at Lahore University of Management Sciences and a Middle East expert. Welcome both of you to the show. Mr. Rahimullah, I want to start with you. I want to talk about what your take is on these talks, especially considering they are coming just a week after the previous ones held in Moscow.
Talks are becoming very significant. The first two rounds of talks were very basic and preliminary. Now they are talking about substantive issues. We don't have any official statement regarding the details of the discussions, but this information which has been leaked to the media shows that now this very important and foremost Taliban demand about the withdrawal of foreign forces, that is being discussed. Taliban have always said that that is the most important issue, the core issue. And initially they were demanding immediate withdrawal of foreign forces, but I believe they are now showing some flexibility. They are talking about a timetable of withdrawal.
You say that they've changed stance, maybe the Taliban, because the US has seemed to come up with some number, a 6-month time period possibility of withdrawal, but they're not agreeing on that.
I think the timetable will be discussed further. The Americans would like to discuss this also with the Afghan government because they want to take the Afghan government along. They actually are asking Taliban that the Afghan government should also join these talks. Taliban are not agreeing at this stage. So I believe that the timetable could be from 6 months up to 1 year or even more. But I think that this is a matter of discussion. But this is very significant that, the US actually is willing to talk about the withdrawal now.
Now, realistically speaking, you're an expert in the region. You have been seeing the first-hand account of how this 17-year-old war has been unfolding. How can we come to terms with the idea of US withdrawal, of NATO forces leaving in a time frame of even 1 year? And I ask this question in context to what will be left behind, because the Taliban are demanding that US withdraws, foreign forces withdraw, and then they will take the next step, which is intra-Afghan peace talks.
As I said earlier, they are willing to discuss the timetable. So if the timetable is given, Taliban would be able to tell their rank and file that, look, we have achieved this thing. Taliban will say that the Americans are willing to withdraw, and we should give them some time. I think this period, whether 6 months or more, will be used, for discussing other important issues. For example, the issue of the release of Taliban prisoners from Guantanamo, from Bagram, and from other places. Then also the issue of removal of Taliban leaders' names from the UN Security Council blacklist. The Americans are demanding a ceasefire, which Taliban have not agreed until now. But I think once the withdrawal starts, there would be a ceasefire. So, things are moving ahead. One of the statements made by Zalmay Khalilzad is very interesting. He says Taliban have now accepted that they cannot win this war militarily. So if Taliban are saying that, the Americans also are saying that. Both sides are saying, we have a stalemate, we can't win it militarily, so let's talk. That concession by both sides, I think, can move things ahead.
So what do you think changed? What changed for the Taliban that they are suddenly now ready to come to the table and stop their military operations?
I think when their main demand has been accepted, the Americans are not talking directly to Taliban, and Taliban are still not talking to the Afghan government. That is the the clinching point. That is the most significant, concession.
But doesn't this pose a massive problem in the region, especially since we're talking about troop withdrawals, we're talking about a timeline, how this will go forward, peace will go forward in the region, when the key player, the Afghan government, is not even part of this conversation?
The Afghan government is being taken into confidence before and after every meeting with Taliban. Zalmay Khalilzad is going to Kabul, consulting the Afghan government, not only the president, Ashraf Ghani, or the chief executive officer, Dr. Abdullah, but he's also meeting the other important players in Afghanistan, the former Northern Alliance leadership, the former jihadi leaders. So I think they are on board. The Afghan government, in fact, is demanding a seat at the table, but that, I think, will come a bit later. I think this will not happen immediately.
The Afghan government has been ominously silent, and now, as Mr. Rahimullah has mentioned, that they have been taken into confidence. But just politically, if we were to look at this into context, we are to look at it historically, how do you feel like the peace process is getting affected by the fact that the Afghan government is not part of these conversations, or does it even matter right now?
I think it's also about de facto control. I think the Taliban has increasingly, strengthened its control over Afghanistan. It's gone up to 56%. I think it was lower, much lower in the 20s, and so there is a realization. I mean, I think
well,
it's
that's also very
right.
debatable, isn't
Right.
it? Because various reports suggest that around 55 to 65% of Afghanistan is currently with the government's under the government's control. But again, that's a number we can't reach.
Well, irrespective, it shows that they are there to stay, and there's a sustained sort of presence there. And I think it's a very significant move that the United States is actually engaging with a non-state actor, even though it might be true that the Afghan government is on board. But the fact that they've accepted this and they're engaging as perhaps an occupier and keeping the Afghan government silent is a significant development. And I think what would be important for me, what is more important, is what the question you raised earlier, is that the secrecy of all of this, coupled with the fact that what will happen after 6 months? Will there be constitutional reforms? Are we talking about transitional justice? The court system is to change. It's very easy to talk about these things, but the future hasn't been laid out. To me, it seems that the United States, to an extent, just wants to just rush out, perhaps.
And this has been their mistake earlier on as well.
Right.
So is it because the Trump administration is under a lot of criticism, you feel, about the war, or the proxy wars that are, or the wars coalition that they are supporting in different wars around the region?
Yeah, I think domestically his base is such that they don't want to be involved in situations where they have fewer sort of stakes involved. And so I think that there's a domestic angle to this also. I think there are different wars that are more important to America. And for them, focusing on Iran or in the Middle East is perhaps more politically expedient for them than looking at Afghanistan specifically.
Now, coming back to you, Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, I want to talk a little about Pakistan's involvement, and if any, in the peace process that is unfolding, as the government was not involved in the Moscow talks as well as these ones. The High Peace Commission was, however, and before these talks took place, there was another round of talks that were planned in Indonesia, trilateral, and Mr. Samiul Haq was invited then, and Maulana Fadlur Rahman was invited then. But and there was one view in Pakistan, however, that it didn't matter whether these people participated or not. What is your take on Pakistan's involvement in bringing peace in the region and participating in these talks?
There was one event in Indonesia which was an ulama conference. So religious scholars, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and some other countries were invited. That was a different event. Then Indonesia hosted a Taliban delegation from Qatar, which was, admission or acceptance of Taliban as a major player in the dispute. Then Uzbekistan invited a Taliban delegation. Russians are interacting with Taliban. So Taliban are gradually gaining legitimacy, and they are willing to, interact with anyone who wants to interact. Now, Pakistan still has a role. Pakistan may not have played a very significant role in making all this happen. I mean, the direct talks between the U.S. and the Taliban. You know, Qatar, as the host country of Taliban Political Commission, also is playing a very important role. But I think that, you know, these talks may face hurdles. And even if there's a progress, the Americans will keep asking Pakistan to play a role to overcome any hurdles. Then if there is some breakthrough, then there will be a need for guarantors. So Pakistan will be one of the important guarantors of any peace agreement.
How do you feel that Pakistan would play that role if it were to play the role of a guarantor in this peace process, especially considering their strained relationship with the Afghan government?
You know, even if the relations are strained, as you have been maybe following, the Afghan government keeps asking Pakistan to bring Taliban to the negotiation table. They keep asking Pakistan that the irreconcilable elements among Taliban should be prosecuted, should be expelled from Pakistan. So, you know, this understanding, this realization is there both in Kabul and Washington. That's why they are demanding, you know, Pakistan to do more.
Now,
both in terms of the war against terrorism, action against the Haqqani network and the Afghan Taliban. So they understand, they know that Pakistan has long-standing contacts with Taliban, and Pakistan's role as a neighboring country is very important. Pakistan is hosting almost 3 million Afghan refugees. So I think, you know, Pakistan's role cannot be underestimated.
And also, like you mentioned, their role cannot be underestimated. Do they possibly have any bargaining chip over this spat that is going on between Trump and the Pakistan government in terms of not doing enough in the war on the war on terror, and especially in terms of being an incubator cell for terrorists in Afghanistan?
You know, Trump or the U.S. administration, they are used to making these very categorical, generalized statements. They say Pakistan has done nothing. This is, you know, trying to ignore whatever Pakistan has done. I think if you ask the Pentagon, the Defense Ministry, they will tell you what Pakistan has done and what Pakistan has been doing and is capable of doing. I think, you know, this is something which a politician can say very categorically, that we have given them $33 billion and they have done nothing. I think,
but Mr. Rahimullah, while you say that the Pentagon will recognize and appreciate, does recognize and appreciate Pakistan's efforts, but at the same time, when we talk about military aid that has been slashed to the tune of $1.3 billion US, then where do you think in reality the relationship stands between the both of them?
You know, relations are not good. That's understandable. But let me tell you, the fact that the U.S. was not withholding all these payments, all this assistance, the coalition support fund for all these years, this was actually an appreciation that Pakistan is doing something. It's not because they would have stopped this assistance long ago. So Pakistan was helping out. Even now, the Americans are holding a carrot as well. They say, if you do this, we will start helping you. So it's not that, you know, in black and white. I think there is some cooperation, you know, Pakistan allowing the NATO supply lines both on the ground and in the air via Pakistan, Pakistan providing intelligence information, Pakistan allowing the use of its air bases for the U.S., you know, fighter jets and drones. All this is documented, you know. Pakistan allowing the U.S. also to carry out drone strikes, you know, as Musharraf has conceded. So Pakistan has done a lot. It may not be enough as far as the U.S. is concerned, but I think without Pakistan's help, the Americans would have faced more problems and more complications in Afghanistan.
So Sikandar, very quickly to you now about the power vacuum that we were talking about earlier on before we spoke of the Pakistan's role in this peace process. What kind of a power vacuum are we expecting if we see that the peace talks continue and the US withdraws? Do we, and maybe I should ask, if there is even going to be a power vacuum, or do you think the intra-Afghan peace talks would be successful?
I mean, it basically links to the question you were raising earlier with Mr. Yousafzai, is that power vacuums will invariably follow when you have after coming out of a civil conflict, civil war kind of a situation. And in that respect, the role of Pakistan cannot be discounted. I think the US realizes for sustainable peace that Pakistan is a quintessential actor in this exercise. And I mean, I would like to sort of comment on this further. I think that the role that Pakistan will play in the region has to be seen in how the US is reacting to Pakistan at this point in time. I feel that historically the US has had sort of a strange relationship with Pakistan. But I think that currently this is a strategy that the Trump administration is using, not just in Pakistan, but in other environments as well. Is it Palestine? Is it Iran? Is this approach to squeeze a country who might be an enemy or an ally in ways in which they eventually buckle in to that pressure? And I think this is perhaps a strategy that Trump is employing with Pakistan in a way that it shows the importance of Pakistan in this process as well. It's a two-pronged approach to engage with the Taliban on this end, engage with Pakistan through pressure to make them do what they require. And going back to your question about the space, I think it's more complicated because the vacuum, you're talking about reconstruction, we're talking about constitutional reform, we're talking about access to justice. These are all things that need to be thought through carefully, and for that Pakistan is, again, trade is going to play a very, very important role in the region vis-a-vis Afghanistan.
But considering what Pakistan is going through on its own in terms of a new government in place, trying to straighten the economy, crippling under debt, is this really on our priority list right now to make this work on the other side of the border?
I think it will be because, again, there are other examples to this effect. I mean, look at Iran. It's going through massive economic turmoil at this point in time, but its involvement in the region is still there. I think foreign relations and domestic conditions can be tackled at the same time, and I think Pakistan strategically realizes that with a hostile neighbor on its eastern front, it has to engage with Afghanistan irrespective of its economic and its political instability.
Now, Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai, I want to come back to you about this question on Pakistan's involvement. Pakistan has been playing a very crucial role that you were saying, and internationally not necessarily being acknowledged for all it does. Now, just before the Moscow talks, they released some very prominent Taliban leaders. And prior to that, Mullah Bardar was arrested on the basis that he tried to initiate talks with the Afghan government in secrecy, not involving Pakistan. Can you shed a little more light on this relationship?
In fact, I don't agree with this assessment that Mullah Abdul Ghani Biradar was trying to hold peace talks with the Afghan government. This is a propaganda made by the Afghan government. He is one of the most, hawkish leaders among Taliban. Now that he has been released, you will see that he will never interact with the Afghan government on his own. He will follow the Shura. He was a deputy leader. How can you expect a deputy leader, after Mullah Omar, to initiate peace talks with Afghan government without, involving the Shura? So I think that's wrong. Secondly, Pakistan has done its bit. Biradar and Ahmadullah Nane and Samad Sani, all these guys were arrested by Pakistan because it was a joint operation with the US. Some of the intelligence was provided by the US. Pakistan actually in 2013 announced that it has released Mullah Biradar, but the US put its foot down and he was not released. Now that the Americans are holding direct talks with Taliban, and Taliban are demanding the release of all their prisoners, whether they're in Afghanistan, Pakistan, the US, or any other country. This is how the Americans actually wanted this to happen. They told Pakistan,
on their terms,
Pakistan obliged, because Pakistan wanted to play a positive role. So these people have been released on the request of the Afghan government and the US. And they are expected to play a positive role now in the peace process. So I think, it's not that Pakistan cannot do anything or Pakistan won't do anything. Pakistan will go along and also try to keep its own interest, supreme.
And how much do you think Pakistan will be able to help, considering its own economy, its situation? in terms of if there is US withdrawal and as it withdraws, the mess that will be left behind? How will the government of Afghanistan gain any help from Pakistan on that front when we're speaking of reconstruction, when we're speaking of a strategic alliance?
You know, Pakistan has until now given $1 billion to Afghanistan for reconstruction and for development. India has given $3 billion. Everybody talks about the Indian assistance, nobody talks about the Pakistani assistance. Pakistan has built schools, colleges, roads and faculties in some of the universities. You know, it's a lot of money for a poor country like Pakistan having economic problems. Now, the other thing is, you know, in many, issues, in many ways, Pakistan is the lifeline for the Afghan economy. The transit trade, the bilateral trade, the refugees, you know, the students. We have given 6,000 fully funded scholarships to Afghan students to study in our university and professional colleges. So it's not that, you know, Pakistan is not trying to help. The issue is that, you know, this will be again, you know, in future, whether the US or NATO troops leave or they stay, you know, Pakistan-Afghanistan economic relations will remain strong. There has been a drop in the bilateral trade. It is because the UN, the NATO troops, which were 150,000, have mostly gone. So all the supplies from Pakistan for these NATO troops, they came down, and there was a drop from $2.4 billion bilateral trade to about $1.2 billion. But I think it may rise again. The other thing is that, you know, this is a very tricky situation. If the foreign troops remain in Afghanistan, Taliban will continue fighting. They will justify their attacks saying these are occupied. But if they leave without putting in place a structure of administration, there will again be problems. That's why these peace talks should lead to stability, not to instability.
Very quickly, could you emphasize what kind of structure do you envision or do you have in mind or is being discussed at the moment?
You know, the Afghan government has announced elections for president on 20th of April next year. The Americans are in a hurry to make a deal before that. Because if elections are held and they have a new president, that president may not agree to any interim arrangement. Because one of the issues being discussed is to have an interim government which can hold elections in future. So that is, the timelines are very important. Secondly, you know, the ideal situation will be to have an interim government, or better still to have some kind of a power sharing. But I don't expect Taliban to share power with the present Afghan government. So interim government will be the best solution, I think. And then Taliban could continue and talk to the Afghan government to amend the constitution. That, and then, you know, the other CPMs, the confidence-building measures like release of prisoners, having a ceasefire, having a monetary mechanism to oversee the ceasefire. So I think all these steps will have to be taken.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rahimullah Yousafzai. We will now be taking a short break and we'll come back with the second top story. You're watching Newswire. Welcome back. This is Newswire. Yemen's Houthi rebels say that they will halt drone and missile attacks on Saudi Arabia, the UAE and their Yemeni allies. Now, the group is ready to cooperate if Saudi-led coalition wants peace in the region. Now, over 10,000 people have died, and according to the UN, so an international pressure is mounting on the warring parties to end this conflict. To discuss more, we have in the studios our guest, Dr. Sikandar. Now, before we delve right into what is happening here in Yemen, could you give us a bit of a background on how this conflict started in the first place?
Right. So I think this conflict is both of an economic nature as well as there are religious undertones to this conflict. The Zaidi Shias, who the Houthis belong to, till the 60s there was an Imamiyyat there, then subsequently you have a Saudi-backed government in power. This conflict actually stems from an economic, in 2014, it has economic underpinnings because of certain fuel subsidies that were lifted by the government, which led to protests, which eventually led to the Houthis coming down from the northern areas, the Saudi province, which they controlled, and capturing Sana'a, and eventually a very important, vital port, which 70 to 80% of trade in Yemen goes through that port. So,
does it go maybe a little further back to 2011 when it all started? Do you think it's, or was that irrelevant in how things have unfolded now?
I mean, I think this is a constant sort of, it was
when
developing.
There was the transition of power to
right.
Mansour Hadi, do you think it was then?
Right, but I think that the catalyst was the 2014 sanctions, and then the previous former rulers supported the Iranis, as they said, in this proxy war, was close to Iran. So there's a lot of this trend in the Middle East, as you see, that is, certain capitals are now famed to be controlled by Irani establishment, and others are controlled by the Saudis. So this Cold War is panning out in the region between Saudi Arabia and Iran for quite a while now.
So what is the political angle to how this developed?
I mean, the political angle is the economic and the social freedoms, the rights that the Houthis are demanding. That because even when this conflict started, the Houthis argued that for a long time they didn't actually enter the conflict till the situation became unbearable economically. So that's when they step in, and so it's conflated, I would say.
So where do you think the separatists come in? Earlier on, it was the Houthis versus the Saudi-led coalition. Now the separatists have also sort of broken ranks with the Saudi-led coalition. What is their role now in this conflict?
I think it's just not them. It's when a country descends into civil war, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of actors come in to play. I think there is a massive presence of Al-Qaeda, who are actually fighting the Houthis because they consider them infidels. There's ISIL involvement now. They've done a lot of terrorist attacks and they control various parts of the country. So I think this is mimicking what's happening in Syria, what happened in Iraq. It's a trend.
And now that we see that the Houthis are the ones who are asking for ceasefire, what do you think has changed? And what happened earlier when those 3 UN-backed peace talks failed miserably? What has changed now that they've seemed to have taken a different tactic?
I think it's not just them. I think it's this general sort of impetus going in this whole exercise because of the involvement of the US and Britain. Britain has moved. I think there is a humanitarian disaster in the region.
But there's always been a humanitarian disaster. Why are they suddenly more concerned about those 5 million children that are at the verge of their death in Yemen? This is one of the worst humanitarian crises in decades. But I'm just wondering, because it seems to me almost that this seems to be a trend in the Middle East where ceasefire talks are now taking precedence. Do you feel like that this is the trend, or this might be different from what is happening in, say, Gaza, what is happening here in Syria, what is happening in Afghanistan? How do you think this could be different? I think
there are undertones of this, again, this sort of Middle East regional war that is underway. I think we have to understand that under international law, if a rebel force controls the capital for a long enough time and they have structures in place, they become the legitimate government. And I think there is fear because of, as proclaimed by Western powers, of the Iranian involvement, that this could eventually mean that this would be the government. So this is an attempt to perhaps negotiate a settlement where eventually you don't have a country which is effectively what you see in Iraq is a country controlled by Iran. I think there's that to it as well. But I do feel that the humanitarian angle, because there's a lot of movement with outside of Yemen now. People are sort of, asylum seekers, and hundreds and thousands are going into Djibouti and Somalia. They are over, and the sport is basically catering to all of this country. And so there's no question there is a humanitarian disaster which parallels more than what you see in Palestine at this point in time, or I mean it's greater than that, and other countries as well. So I think that's also motivating this.
Now, alongside with the humanitarian crisis, where there's no dispute, there are definitely very harrowing numbers coming out of here. I mean, the UN reports alone 10,000 people have died, which could be a very conservative take on how many people have actually lost their lives in this conflict. But just like taking a look at the geopolitical situation, what is happening in the world today, do you feel like that maybe the Saudi journalist Khashoggi's murder in Turkey that has taken place last month might have something to do with how things are unfolding now here?
Yes, I think there is, particularly because Khashoggi was actually, there's an indication that he was about to disclose information about Yemen, right? And Saudi involvement in Yemen. And also the fact, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons for this. But I mean, for example, recent figures have also shown that the Saudi-led coalition has disproportionately impacted civilians, and that's coming out also. And I think this pressure coming on Saudi because of this recent episode, the diplomatic disaster that they're facing, is making and Iran's role being not. I mean, it's basically pushing Iran in a positive light in other ways because the attention has now turned towards Saudi, is forcing countries in the region and this coalition, in light of with US and British involvement, to realign, to refocus on how to tackle these situations, these disasters.
Let me ask this question again. Now, you mentioned that Saudis, that the Khashoggi might have had some information that he was about to disclose along with related to Yemen, but also just keeping in mind, Saudi is leading this coalition with UAE and several other countries, and they are attacking. There have been over 1,000 missile strikes from them, and they've been attacking targets like children's school buses, schools themselves, hospitals, marketplaces, killing hundreds upon hundreds of civilians. And now with Khashoggi's murder also on their list of things that went horribly wrong or things that have happened related to MBS, don't you feel like that maybe they are finally under pressure to start changing their tactics?
I think they are, and I think the Western powers that back them are under pressure as well, because a lot of the intelligence and logistical support was being provided by Britain and the US. So I think that there is generally pressure on them, and I think also it indicates that a country that has such sophisticated technology, weaponry, fighting a rebel force, if they're targeting disproportionately civilians and children and women, that is an indication that perhaps they were not using adequate precaution, and that's coming out as well.
Adequate precaution or using dirty tactics. But when you mention Houthi rebel forces that they're fighting against, let's talk a little more about who's backing them. Where are they getting the funding and the military equipment? Can you shed a little more light on the historical, sort of the history of Houthis, where they come from, and where have they, with this uprising, started?
Right. I mean, I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think that they are a force that is limited to the northwest of Yemen. They have come down, and now they have more control over the country. They control the most important port and the capital. But their support, as argued by Western powers, is primarily shipments from Iran of weaponry, and also because of their religious similarities with Iran, that Iran seems to sort of, support, rebels, whether it's Syria, well, not in Syria because they were supporting the establishment there, but whether it's Lebanon or whether it's Yemen, they end up, like providing armed support, logistical support, all forms of support, training. In fact, there's some discussion now of, or some evidence is coming to light that the Iranians are sending their own military commanders and planners to the Houthis to basically organize this war in a particular way.
Okay, so we've just been joined here with Ahmed Alioglu, a Middle East expert. Thank you for joining us here at Newswire, Mr. Ahmed. I want to ask you a little about, we're just talking about the Houthi rebels, and we're talking about the ceasefire that they're ready to make, given that Saudi Arabia, UAE are all ready to make peace in the region. First, we want to just delve into the background a little bit of the conflict in this region. Could you shed some light on this, please?
Well, it's a very complicated war. What's happening in Yemen, it started by the Saudis in order to bring back the legitimate internationally recognized government of Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi, who is the elected president after toppling Ali Abdullah Saleh. The Houthi group, which is a proxy of Iran in the region, started a revolution, a kind of an uprising against this. The Saudis found themselves in 2014 obliged to militarily get into the war, and they got into this quagmire with the Saudi-led coalition in what's known as the decisive storm, then the offensive of hope. But it seems that they're getting into Saudi, into Yemen, and people, civilians, or what they call as the collateral damage of the offensive, is increasing, embarrassing the Saudis, and the Houthis found themselves sometimes unable to combat all this fire coming out. They, from now to then, trying to attack Saudi Arabia in the Mandab Strait and the Red Sea. They attacked some ships, and even attacked the Saudi cities, Mecca and Riyadh. And at the end of the day, we're still in this bloodshed, in this vicious circle, where neither the Saudi Arabistan strategy is very clear what exactly they're looking for in Yemen, or will they militarily finish what's happening there and end the Houthi group. On the other hand, you have the Houthi who are trying to present themselves as the representative of the Yemeni revolution, while he is accused, and the whole group is accused, of being a proxy and implementing the agenda of Iran in the region.
Let me Mr. Ahmed, let me just ask you to expand a little bit over here. The Houthi rebels there in Yemen, how much support do they have of the civilians on the ground? Or is this, like you mentioned, a proxy war, and that basically is their only lifeline?
No, they do have lots of support on the ground. Lots of people in North Yemen, they have sympathy with the Houthi. But at the end of the day, it's not the support. How you're going to measure this support unless you have a transparent election to show the real proportion of different parties, whether political parties, armed groups, different factions. We do not have any statistics on the ground, but what we can see is on Fridays, they do have massive audience, massive people gathering in massive demonstrations to protest against the attacks. But what we understand that militarily, they're very strong on the ground, they're supported by Iran, and from now to then, different proxies of Iran in the region, like Hezbollah of Lebanon, speaks in favor of the Houthi, which is a Shia or a Shia sect representative, more or less, in Yemen. So I can't say that they do not have support, but do they support the aspirations of the Yemeni revolution started 7 years ago? I don't think so.
And what has changed for Saudi Arabia and the coalition that has led over 1,000 missile strikes targeting schools, hospitals, markets? What has changed for them? Do you feel that maybe they are under international pressure more so after what happened to the Washington Post journalist, the Saudi journalist Khashoggi?
Definitely. Khashoggi cast dark shadows on Saudi policy, in addition, of course, to the major failure. Now it's almost 3 or 4 years, the Saudis' intervention militarily in Yemen, and nothing happened. There's no clear strategy. What they're doing is bombarding places, civilians. Death roll is very high. The international community is not happy with this strategy. Still, the United States, the United Kingdom are supporting the Saudis, and Donald Trump publicly says, with all the scandals we're seeing from Khashoggi to the bloodshed to the massacres in Yemen, that he is going to continue supporting and selling arms to Saudi Arabia. This is not going to end unless the international powers realize that there must be a real strategy to solve the problem. It's not going to last forever, this military solution.
And what about Iran? Sorry to cut you here, but what about Iran? You're talking about international pressure on Saudi Arabia, and the sanctions imposed by Trump's administration on Iran, and increasingly so, their economy is crippling, is practically imploding. They're hardly getting through. Do you think that is also affecting this this move made by the Houthis to come to the table and say, okay, this is enough, we need to sit down and come up with a peaceful solution to the region?
Of course, look, Iran is using al-Houthi as proxy, as I told you, and the al-Houthi does not have an independent decision to take. It's up to the Iran to decide, and this what's happening, the sanctions, Iran in major trouble. But on the other hand, it is using its proxies in the region, whether in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen, in order to tell the international community, the United States in particular, that Iran is not weak. They can take the battle into different places, and they're using Houthi for this purpose, attacking the ships in the Red Sea and affecting the international trade. By doing this with Al-Houthi help, this is not going to be helpful to the international community. The sanctions are very effective from one side, but on the other hand, they're mobilizing the communities in Iraq, the people there. They think that they're fighting the big devil, which is the United States. That is going to be used as a leverage from Iran to look for different outlets with the help of China, Russia, even the European Union. Now, not all the 6+ or the 5+1 nuclear agreement, not all of them dumped the agreement. Still, they are committed to, including Germany, all the European countries. It's only the United States that took this unilateral decision. So the Houthi is in bad condition, of course. Iran is not in the best conditions, but still it is using this kind of, proxies in order to advance or develop its negotiation term on the table with the United States and the international community. So the Saudis are more in trouble rather than the Iranians.
And also, 3 previous attempts have failed of UN trying to broker peace in the region. How do you feel this will not also fail, or will this be any different?
Well, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince MBS, is in bad condition. I think that he is willing to find solution because, again, there is no clear strategy in Yemen. There is no major success. The military solution is not working. Houthi group seems to be steadfast. The death toll among the civilians and the collateral damage, the damage in the infrastructure is very huge. The groups that supporting the Emirati, the United Arab Emirates, and the Saudi coalition are not so motivated. So I think they have lots of pressure to come to the table. On the other hand, you have the Houthi is nothing good. It's nothing good in terms of the finance, in terms of the military support. It's not in good condition at this moment. So each party, both sides, think that is the only way is to sit on the table, find political solution and reconciliation rather than going ahead with this special cycle that is not going to end.
So, Sikandar, do you agree with Mr. Ahmed? What he's saying is that that possibly this could succeed this time round because the previous 3 talks failed miserably. What's your take on the possible success of these talks? Are we headed anywhere?
Right. I mean, I agree with him mostly. I think that both Saudi and Iran are under tremendous pressure. Something that I feel that Iran is outside of Iran more powerful in terms of its influence than from within Iran, which is as you mentioned. But it's economically crumbling. But I do feel that the nature of what I see in terms of the resolution that's going to come in the Security Council is going to be more humanitarian in nature rather than more in terms of sort of a political solution. I think the initial step, even if there's will on both sides to try to move in a positive way in trying to resolve this issue, towards moving towards peace, I think the first step would be humanitarian. That humanitarian aid comes in, the port is open, the parties, the civilian situation, the humanitarian disasters are dealt with by the international community. I think in the long term there's a possibility, but I'm not 100% sure that something wouldn't happen in the middle. Some events might, alter the situation in a particular way, that you have this political compromise and solution. I think that's a long way ahead. I think the initial step could be there. The humanitarian positive step might be there.
Mr. Ahmed, do you feel like that maybe the reassurances provided by the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths to the Houthis could be the key to bringing peace in this region, could be the key to bringing them at least to the table to talk? Do you feel like those reassurances are different from before?
Well, I do understand in the region that none of the groups believe or have any trust and faith in the United Nations. They failed in Syria. They didn't succeed to bring Assad into negotiation table. The Assad regime continued bombing and killing the people using chemical weapons. The United Nations was not, the special envoy to Syria was not able even to save the civilians. humanitarian corridor to let them escape the conflicting and warring zones. So the same thing when it comes to Yemen now. I don't think that the United Nations would be the major player or a kind of an honest, powerful negotiator or a kind of mediator between both parties. It's only the United States, the United Kingdom, and Iran. So the United States, if they do have the political power and will to let Saudi Arabia back down and sit on the table, MBS is not going to say no. He is not going to be reluctant. On the other hand, if Iran decides that Houthi must sit on the table and talk, I don't think that it's a kind of Yemeni national decision. It's not up to the Saudis. It's not up to the Yemeni. I think now it's in the international powers' hand that they can practice more pressure. They're, by a way or another, more or less, they're the sponsors of these fighting groups.
Earlier on, the U.S. had no problem with the Saudi-backed government of Mansour Hadi. Now, what do you think would happen if there was to be a power-sharing agreement? Would Hadi come back, or would it be another interim setup? Could you shed some light on the possible scenarios as we can see unfold in this area?
Well, what I understand is we don't need to be fully optimistic. What I understand that the Arab Spring that started in 2011 is not finished. It's not the winter of the Arab, what started as the Arab uprising. The people of Yemen do have lots of aspirations. They do not feel that the revolution they took to the street 7 years ago in order to achieve certain goals, these aspirations were not achieved by neither the Houthi nor the Saudi Arabia military intervention. So what I understand is the only way to solve the problem is to go back to the people and give them the chance, the opportunity to choose and make democratic election. Now, will this happen or not? It depends on the will of the international community, as the external spoilers who are not willing to have real democracies in the Middle East. So that's one of the factors or the variables affecting what's happening. It also depends on the royal family in Saudi Arabia to understand that the Houthi is a group, is part and parcel of the Yemeni fabric, and it's, you know, the mosaic of Yemeni. It's the Shiite. You cannot terminate the Shiite sect from the region. And it's also up to the Iran to understand that the people of this region will not respect, will not have any kind of sympathy with Iran if they do not stand by the nations, not the regimes that they're killing their people. Houthi is not the main factor in Yemen. He is not
also the separatists.
Yeah, of course. So if Iran doesn't understand that the regime in Syria is not a representative, is not legitimate, killed lots of people, lost the legitimacy, the same as the Houthi is a group. It's not a group that represents the whole Yemeni aspiration. It should be represented, of course, in a parliament, in the government, but it's not all Yemen. So by understanding these two, the equation will be solved, I think, and we could come back to the negotiation table, the voting polls, and people can decide.
I want to expand a little more about when you said that the external spoilers are a real risk at bringing any effective conclusion to these peace talks. And I want to ask you, where does UAE stand? Because there does seem to have been a rift within the coalition itself. Saudi Arabia supports the Hadi government, and then UAE has kind of broken away in a way and sort of backed the separatists. Is that something that can be resolved, or has no effect to what is coming about in peace talks right now?
What I understand is Mohammed bin Salman is the spoiled boy of Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates. And Mohammed bin Zayed's main concern is the trade routes, mainly in marine routes. Economy is the most important. He wants to have control on Socotra Island, where you don't have any. It's in the ocean. It doesn't have any Houthi rebels. He wants to have control on the trade routes of the Strait the Bab el-Mandab Strait on the Red Sea, so that, and he also controls the Sinai Channel on Egypt. By doing this, sorry, by having control on all of these, he's going to have the control of the international trade, and he's going to compete in the region. That's the main obsession of the United Arab Emirates. I don't think that it's a main kind of sectarian conflict between Iran and the Sunni world. It's rather the Saudis who do try to promote this kind of notion. But still, MBS is not the one who takes the final. He's not the one with the final word. It's Mohammed bin Zayed in the United Arab Emirates, who's mainly concerned about business and ports, and you know, the initiative, road, the China project. All these stuff are in the background of what Mohammed bin Zayed is thinking about the region.
Sikandar, do you agree with Mr. Ahmed there about UAE's role in bringing peace in the region, and might be sort of come into conflict with them backing the separatists?
I think I would agree with him that the UAE as a nation, as a country, is so small that its interests are primarily economic. And I think that, you know, it's not of that sort of religious undertones that we see in the case of Saudi and you know, Iran. But though the UAE has always had a very, you know, I would say frosty relationship with Iran for other reasons in terms of the Persian Gulf and its close association with the US. So I think that's also playing a factor, but I don't think it's...
So it's essentially an economic problem, right? So, and with that, we'll have to close the discussion here. And as the ceasefire holds and talks undergo in Yemen between the Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition, the updates will be coming in. Stay tuned to Indus News. You've been watching Newswire.